Good morning from the western suburbs of Minneapolis. The road ahead winds through tall oaks and quiet, curving streets, past wooded yards and glints of water between the trees. This is the city of Minnetonka, Minnesota, and if you only know the name from the famous lake, you are about to discover that the city and the lake are two very different stories. Over the next 15 minutes or so, we are going to ride through more than 10,000 years of history, from a Dakota homeland to frontier mills to grand lakeside hotels to the corporate campuses hiding in these very woods. So settle in and let us roll. Let us set the scene. Minnetonka sits about 10 miles due west of downtown Minneapolis, a mature, affluent suburb of roughly 28 square miles. Today, a little over 52,000 people live here, in a landscape that blends glassy corporate campuses with wooded, lake-dotted neighborhoods. The city is threaded by three creeks, Minnehaha, 9 Mile, and Purgatory, and it cradles smaller waters like Glen Lake and Lone Lake. But to understand how this place got its name and its shape, we have to start with water and with the people who knew it first. The name Minnetonka comes from the Dakota language, from words meaning big water, Minnetonka. In 1852, the territorial governor Alexander Ramsey formally applied that name Minnetonka to the lake. And from the lake, the name spread outward to everything that followed: the settlement, the township, the village, and finally the city. So the city is named for the lake. But here is the twist that trips up almost everyone, and it is worth getting right before we go any further. The city of Minnetonka contains only the small, easternmost tip of Lake Minnetonka. Almost all of that sprawling, many-armed lake lies in other cities entirely, places like Wayzata, Orono, Excelsior, Deephaven, and Mound. So when we talk about the city of Minnetonka, we are mostly talking about creeks and woods and smaller lakes, not the great resort waters themselves. The lake shaped this region profoundly, and we will get to its golden age. But keep that distinction in your pocket the whole ride. The city is not the lake. People have lived in this region for something like 10,000 years. In the centuries before European settlement, this was Mdewakanton Dakota country. They came to Lake Minnetonka to hunt and to fish, to harvest wild rice from the shallows, and to gather maple sap when the season turned. The land held sacred places, among them Spirit Knob and the shore known as Enchanted Island. This was not empty wilderness waiting to be found. It was a homeland, worked and known and honored across generations, long before any map bore the word Minnetonka. That homeland was taken through treaty. In the summer of 1851, two agreements, signed at Traverse des Sioux on July 23rd and at Mendota on August 5th, ceded vast Dakota lands to the United States. West of the Mississippi, the land was given up for roughly 7.5 cents an acre. Promised payments and protections were broken again and again. That betrayal helped ignite the United States-Dakota War of 1862, and in 1863, most Dakota people were forcibly exiled from Minnesota. The suburb we are riding through today rests on that history, and it deserves to be remembered honestly. Listen for it as we ride, because the next chapter is written in running water. Somewhere off through these trees, Minnehaha Creek is moving quietly eastward, the same creek that carried the first outsiders into this country, and the same creek whose current would turn the wheels of the settlement's very first mill. Let us follow it. The story of Euro-American discovery here is almost a boyish adventure. In 1822, two teenagers from Fort Snelling, Joseph R. Brown and William Joseph Snelling, set out to canoe some 22 miles up Minnehaha Creek to find the lake at its source. The mosquitoes proved too much for young Snelling, who turned back, but Brown pressed on with his Mdewakanton companions and reached the lake. Remarkably, for the next 3 decades, few other Euro-Americans knew or cared that it was there. The lake stayed for a while longer, a local secret. Here is the geography that made everything possible. Lake Minnetonka spills out at Gray's Bay into Minnehaha Creek, and that creek runs about 22 miles east, tumbling over the famous Minnehaha Falls before it joins the Mississippi River. Falling water is power, and it was this creek, not the lake, that powered the birth of the settlement. Much later, in 1979, the current Gray's Bay Dam was built to manage the flow, run by the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, which had formed after serious flooding in the 1960s. The settlement itself began with a hunt for water power. In April of 1852, 2 men, Simon Stevens and Calvin Tuttle, scouted Minnehaha Creek looking for a mill site. By 1853, they had completed a sawmill, described as the first privately operated mill in Minnesota west of the Mississippi River. The little community that grew up around it took the name Minnetonka Mills, and it holds a real distinction. It was the first permanent Euro-American settlement in Hennepin County, west of Minneapolis. That sawmill fed a boom. Its timber flowed east to a fast-growing young Minneapolis, and it even helped build the first suspension bridge across the Mississippi River at Minneapolis. For a few short years, Minnetonka Mills was a place of real importance, but the good fortune did not last. In 1860, the original sawmill burned to the ground, and the first settlement was largely abandoned, its people drifting away. The story could have ended right there, a brief frontier flicker. Instead, it started over, this time with flour. It is easy to forget, gliding along smooth pavement like this, that these quiet neighborhoods were once loud with saw blades and millstones and the shouts of working men. Let me take you into the second act, the flower years, when a single ambitious manager tried to turn this creekside village into a rival of the mighty Minneapolis Mills. The revival came in 1868, when a man named Thomas H. Perkins built a 4-story grist mill on the creek. Grinding wheat into flour was the great moneymaker of Minnesota in that era, and Minnetonka Mills wanted its share. 6 years later, in 1874, Charles H. Burwell became manager of the Minnetonka Mill Company, and he believed in the place. He poured money into it, determined to build something that could stand alongside the giants downstream. Under Burwell, the operation swelled into a small industrial village of its own. He added a grain elevator, a warehouse, a cooper shop for making barrels, an engine house, a turbine, and 12 barracks to house the workers. By the early 1880s, the flour mill was producing about 400 barrels a day and employing nearly 50 men. For a creekside settlement that had nearly vanished 20 years earlier, it was a genuine second life, humming with grain and labor and hope. But Minnetonka Mills was fighting a battle it could not win. Just to the east, the enormous mills at St. Anthony Falls in Minneapolis had scale and power this little creek could never match. One by one, the advantages slipped away, and around 1886, milling here ceased for good. The great flour mill sat idle until fire, that recurring villain of this story, finally took it in 1902. The industry that had given the settlement its name and its purpose was gone. Yet one beautiful thing survived. In 1883, at the height of his ambitions, Charles Burwell had built a fine family home on the banks of Minnehaha Creek in the ornate stick and Eastlake style of the day. Burwell himself lived from 1838 to 1917, and his house outlasted the mills, the fires, and the century. It joined the National Register of Historic Places on May 2, 1974. And today the Burwell House is a house museum, owned by the City of Minnetonka, a real doorway back into these vanished years. Now let us swing our attention north and east, out toward that big water we set aside earlier. Because while the city's mills were rising and falling, the lake itself was becoming something extraordinary, a resort so famous that people rode the rails from across the country just to see it. Everything changed on August 24, 1867, when the St. Paul and Pacific Railroad reached the town of Wayzata on the north shore of the lake. Suddenly, the lake was no longer a hidden secret 22 miles up a creek. It was a train ride away, and the tourists came in a flood. Within a few short years, Lake Minnetonka blossomed into a nationally famous summer resort, drawing wealthy visitors from Chicago, St. Louis, and the humid cities of the South, all seeking cool northern breezes. To house them all, developers built palaces. The Hotel St. Louis opened in Deephaven in 1879, with 200 gaslit rooms. Then in 1882, the railroad titan James J. Hill raised the truly enormous Hotel Lafayette at Minnetonka Beach, some 300 rooms across 5 floors, a building 700 feet long. The Lake Park Hotel followed in 1884. These were floating cities of leisure. And yet the Lafayette, that giant, burned to the ground in under an hour on October 4, 1897. The resort age was dazzling, but it was fragile. The lake had a navy to match its hotels. The very day after the Hotel Lafayette opened, James J. Hill launched the Belle of Minnetonka, the largest steamboat the lake ever knew, capable of carrying some 2,500 passengers at once. Picture that grand vessel crowded with parasols and straw hats, churning across the bays between hotel landings, music drifting over the water. The steamboats were how you saw the lake, and for a golden generation they ruled it, the beating heart of a resort at the peak of its fame. Then came one of the lake's most charming inventions. In 1905, the Twin City Rapid Transit Company, the same outfit that ran the streetcars of Minneapolis and St. Paul, commissioned a fleet of express boats. Service began on May 25, 1906. They were painted in the familiar streetcar yellow and red, and each was named for a streetcar stop, so a rider could step off a trolley and straight onto a boat. That service ran until 1926. One of those vessels, the Minnehaha, was later raised from the lake bottom and restored, and it still carries passengers today as a museum boat out of Excelsior. The lake's glittering resort era eventually faded, the hotels gone to fire and demolition. But out here, away from the shore, in the wooded township we have been riding through, a quieter and in some ways stranger transformation was just beginning, the slow birth of a modern city out of scattered farms. Minnetonka Township organized in 1858. An early census the year before had counted only about 41 households, 29 of them farmers. For decades it stayed rural, but as the growing suburbs around it kept annexing pieces, the township actually shrank, from about 36 square miles down to 28, even as its population climbed from around 6,400 in 1940 to more than 15,000 by 1956. To stop what residents called the raids, they voted 2,309 to 1,275 on August 22, 1956, to incorporate as the village of Minnetonka. 12 years later, in 1968, Minnetonka officially became a city. One chapter here is easy to miss, and it is haunting. On January 4, 1916, Hennepin County opened a tuberculosis hospital on Glen Lake, starting with room for just 50 patients. It grew into the largest sanatorium in all of Minnesota, with an average of 706 patients in 1933, and at its peak in 1936, more than 700, some lying on gurneys in the hallways. It was practically its own town, even with its own post office called Oak Terrace, Minnesota. TB Care ended in 1976. The site later closed in 1991, and its buildings came down. Today, a golf course opened by Three Rivers Park District in 1997 covers that ground. After the Second World War, the farms gave way to subdivisions, and then to something bigger. On July 29, 1974, Ridgedale Center opened its doors, a sprawling Dayton-Hudson shopping mall on more than 80 acres, anchored by a Dayton store of over 200,000 square feet. It was the metropolitan area's fourth Great Dale, arriving after Southdale, Brookdale, and Rosedale. With the mall came a wave of commercial and corporate growth that would give this quiet suburb an outsized economic weight. Some of that weight is genuinely global. Cargill, founded back in 1865 and today the largest privately held company in the United States by revenue, runs its worldwide headquarters campus right here. Curiously, its mailing address reads Wayzata, but the campus itself sits physically within the city of Minnetonka. For decades, the healthcare giant United Health Group was also headquartered in Minnetonka, before it moved its official headquarters to neighboring Eden Prairie in 2024, making this its former longtime home. Corporate empires tucked among the oaks. And for all that commerce, Minnetonka has stayed remarkably green. The city holds 50 parks and open spaces and more than 100 miles of trails. Its largest natural area, the Purgatory Community Preserve, covers 155 acres. Lone Lake Community Park offers a 5-mile mountain bike trail winding through a surviving remnant of the ancient Big Woods Forest. And the roughly 15-mile Lake Minnetonka Regional Trail, which we have been sharing today, runs on the bed of an old railway that once carried flour and wheat between Minneapolis and the farms of the upper Midwest. Even the trails remember the mills. So that is the city of Minnetonka, not the famous lake, but a place named for it. A Dakota homeland, then a frontier mill town twice born and twice burned, then a resort's quiet neighbor, and finally a wooded, prosperous modern suburb where a global grain empire hides among the trees along an old rail line. 10,000 years of story, all of it rolling by under two wheels. Thank you so much for riding along with me today. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to Fru World Explorer, and I will see you on the next ride. Until then, keep exploring.